And is your video off?
Yeah, I just turned it off.
Okay. May want to mute for just a sec too while I get the URL and I'll send it.
Great.
treatment options is key.
Today,
3 more
you're
minutes,
redefining how we do
and they're
things.
still not
We
on.
find new ways of speaking, so you're never out of touch. It's
Here they go.
seeing someone's face that
I
comforts
heard
us,
something.
no
Good.
matter where. When those around us know us, they
They've
can
got
show
their
us just
sound
how
on.
much they care. The first steps
Mhm.
of checking in.
I've just admitted a few folks from the waiting room. Are you viewers or are you from the team?
We make a difference when we use it to improve things. Then that change can last within us. When we understand what's possible,
They should be viewers.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just going to mute everyone that we've admitted. We're going to get going in just a couple minutes.
Managing
You've only got a
conflict
couple
starts
of
now
minutes.
with Understand.
That's right. We'll get going very soon.
UnderstandHF.com for a free HF handbook.
Medical school was very stressful. I lost a lot of hair during that time. Nutrafol is 100% drug-free and it's natural.
Rachel, you should be unmuted, and Sam too.
Yeah, I think I am.
Yes.
Okay, great. We're up and running. I think is the simulcast going on the site?
I have no idea.
I'm gonna take a quick look before we get going, but I know we're coming through to YouTube.
Hey, Sam.
Hey.
Is there a link on the cycle site to this live stream?
Yeah, but you have to click on a room. So I on one of I had to go in through like a featured you know what I mean? Hopefully
Okay.
find it. We move my board back. It's picking up in the. There we go. That will help. There we go. What the hell that is? Is that on my screen? Probably, yeah.
I'm not seeing it on the site. Is it at the placeholder link that Brad had sent earlier?
Yeah, it's on the site. So on the home screen that it takes you to,
Mm-hmm.
go down and you're gonna see like 5 blocks of different posts. It's the first one and it says live town hall or election whisperer town hall.
Oh, here it is. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good deal.
Yeah, there's a bit of a delay, but it's
Yep, we're
posted.
broadcasting now. Okay.
Oh,
Let's go ahead and kick it off then, shall we?
let's do it.
Okay, apologies to anyone who's been listening through our technical difficulties for the last minute or two, but I am Flip Pideaux, host of Old Bull TV, the original home of Election Whisperer, starring the great Dr. Rachel Bidikofer, and welcome to tonight's live town hall, live at the Cycle. Tonight we have Rachel herself and her partner in crime, Sam Epstein, and they're going to be taking your questions live all night tonight. Not all night tonight, but throughout the program. The Zoom link, if you do want to ask a question, should be available on the page you're watching on. If you're watching on the cycle.news website, and I believe even if you found us through the YouTube link, I will make sure that it's put in a comment if it's not already there. It should be in the description, but if it's not, I'll paste it as a comment. So with that, while we wait for questions to queue up, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rachel, to tell everyone how tonight's going to go and introduce Sam and get us started.
Yeah, cool. Welcome. This is our second live, town hall, fireside chat, whatever you want to call it, on the Cycle episode of the Election Whisperer. The Election Whisperer will come back into programming after the election. Just, lots of substantive episodes planned for that, but election time has been pretty frantic. And so I thought it would be a cool idea to do some of those Q&As that followers really seem into getting questions answered. So this is an opportunity for people to engage directly with me, and also now with Sam, because Sam is really the architect of the modeling that you're seeing now. I mean, my original modeling has been replaced. Aside from the house races, that's still my simplistic, college education, PBI and diversity model, but the rest of it has been replaced with a new fancy model that Sam created, and I think was very nice to team up and be willing to host it through my website. So I'm really excited about that. Sam is better positioned to answer most questions about it, though I do understand quite a bit about the theoretical stuff, because it's based on the theory of negative partisanship. In terms of actual modeling, questions, that's definitely Sam's wheelhouse. That said, I mean, he's well versed in the theory and a big believer in it, which is why he ended up modeling it and really, I think, bringing to life what I had always wanted to see better quantified, which was my theory. And I, I don't have the statistical skill to really make it live to its full potential. So I'm really excited about what he did. I think, coming out of the gate, we had a little bit of a hitch, but, this is a beautiful work. And I think theoretically, really sound work. And it's been, now reviewed by several really prominent, not just political scientists, but some other data science people too. And so we're really excited about it. And I think it's going to be, it's going to perform really well. And anyway, so our final ratings are now reflected on the map, and they are to some degree a little bit different than what I had on my original ratings. So some of you might have questions about that. And that's because in my ratings, I was doing mixed methods. I had a model, and then I gave myself the liberty to say, hey, but I think that Jamie Harrison might be able to overperform the model. And so we're not doing that with Sam's model. We're just sticking with whatever the model says. So if you have a question as to why the final map doesn't have South Carolina listed as a toss-up, that's why on the Senate map. So with no further, filibustering, I'm going to pass that over, and we're looking forward to talking with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel, for the introduction. Happy to meet all of you over Zoom, and happy to take your questions on the model. I'm very curious to see what you guys thought of our forecast, and happy to answer any and all questions.
Okay, we're actually just starting to get a couple of questions in here now. So if I can go ahead and call on Carrie Copeland, and I'm going to invite you to unmute your mic and ask away.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Thank you so much for your work and for this team and all of the sensible methodology that's so informed and educated. I trust your methods. Please call me and tell me about how weighted the unknowns are, like any shenanigans about electoral tampering, judiciary tampering that might affect what you're predicting now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I am being really clear, our modeling, our work, and the economist work done by Elliot Morris and Nate Silver's work at 538, and all the work that's going to be done. I mean, I don't know, maybe the qualitative handicap work, because what that means, guys, is okay, there's a statistical model like Sam has created, and that's called quantitative modeling, and Nate does that, and Elliot Morris does that, the economist, and that's what this is. And then at Cook Political Report and Sabato's Crystal Ball, the way that they do their ratings is a process called qualitative evaluation. So they have a bunch of factors, and they use their brains to think through, what are these races going to look like? Where are they going to end up? And those are two different methods of determining outcomes, okay? And it's important to understand how those are different. And so when I said I did mixed methods, I had a model, and then I went mostly with the model, but sometimes I was like, yeah, I think the model's probably wrong here. I'm overriding it, okay? So it's important to understand the lingo and how that matters. And so I don't know how the qualitative raters like Cook and Sabato, the Sabato folks are dealing with the possibility of electoral skullduggery, because they would be better positioned to deal with that. Elliott's model, Nate's model, our modeling, that is something that you can't model in this model or their model, especially their models, because they're really designed to deal with historical trends. Like ours could eventually grow to be better accounted for historically, but theirs is running multiple elections. And so like that was not a factor in other elections. So you can't model one thing that's specific to one cycle, right? And so, but the three models, the three quantitative models, they are designed to tell you, like, this is what we measure who wants to vote. And this is how their preferences read. So the polls are telling us Biden has this outside of the margin of error lead in the national head-to-head and in these battlegrounds, right? Not all of them. Florida's within the margin of error, but these Midwestern states is outside. And if everyone who wants to vote gets to cast a ballot and those ballots are counted, this is how it should come out, right? But we can't get our models to tell you, but if the GOP cuts the count and disqualifies 100,000 ballots out of Wisconsin because they were date marked before election day or election day, but didn't arrive until 2 or 3 days after election day because of USPS. Like there's nothing we can do for modeling that. Sam, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think you did a great job, especially, the distinction between votes cast and votes counted. We don't even know at this moment which votes are going to be counted because of pending lawsuits and all these things about whether ballots arrive at a certain time, whether it's acceptable to use curbside voting in Texas or drop boxes. So these decisions are even yet to be made as to whether certain votes are going to be counted. And in some states that will make a big impact, but in others it won't. So since there's so many variables, all we can really estimate is of votes cast, what is going to happen.
Right. But, at least I'm sure Sam agrees with me. So I'm just going to say our position is that every vote that is cast should be counted in a democracy. Right.
Rachel and Sam, BK has a question about early voting data in Florida and Nevada and the appropriate way to interpret it. BK, you're unmuted. Can you go ahead and give us your question?
Hi. So every day, like once every few hours, I tend to check John Ralston's reports on Nevada's early voting. And also there's a user called Umish99 who does the same for Florida on Twitter. And so the trend has been that in both states has been that D's have had the vote by mail advantage building up, but ours have been chipping away at that by in-person early voting. And so, and of course in the comments every day, there's going to be a full-on brawl of what people are trying to glean from this information. And some other experts that I've read say it's pretty much too early you can't really predict the final vote outcome from the early voting patterns. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, this year is especially noisy, and I'll tell you why. It's there's few reasons why. I mean, number one, we've never voted in a pandemic, and we had the states make these emergency changes. And in Pennsylvania, the last cycle, 2016, 5% of the electorate used an absentee or vote by mail system vote, right? And now it's going to be a much larger percent, right? And that's a huge institutional and behavioral change that we've just never seen before, right? So it's hard because you don't have they don't have baselines to measure it. And then in terms of like who would have used absentee balloting and voting, that would have been fairly evenly divided out, more determined about older people and maybe students or disabled people. Now it's a party thing because Trump went full tilt against, started talking about mail balloting as fraud, right? And that was I talk a lot about signaling coming from elites down, and especially went to the president, very powerful signal. And we really saw this massive reaction in Republican voter behavior where they started telling pollsters, I'm not voting by mail. All right. And then, and so we saw this huge shift in the data there. And then, you know, you kind of wonder, well, was that going to actually manifest in behavior? And it looks like it is. So like when we see this dominant vote by mail advantage for Democrats, we can't know. Is that an enthusiasm advantage for Democrats, or is it a product of Trump pushing voters away from voting by mail to voting in person on election day or otherwise? Now, voting early, that's a different thing, right? Because they're not voting by mail. And I think that is a little bit more, you know, you can use that better to gauge enthusiasm. But yeah, that vote by mail has become a very noisy indicator for that reason. But yeah, it's because so many people have gotten burned so many times. I mean, like in 2016, the early vote data looked so dominant for Democrats in Florida in particular. And then they ended up losing the state, right? That people become, you know, pretty afraid, I think, to make assessments off of it. Sam?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, just seeing from what we've seen in polling, as Rachel said, there's obviously big discrepancies, but also I totally agree that we have to see what comes on election day. Like clearly there's a distinction between voters shifting to voting by mail early and then not voting on election day versus a whole nother wave that we could be expecting voting on election day.
Yeah, the one thing I will say that I really think is a very strong signal, and you really should follow Tom Bonnier. I always screw up his name. He is the chief executive of Target Smart, which is one of the big five. There's 5 data analytic companies that service all the campaigns, and he's one of five between Republicans and Democrats, and he's one on the Democratic side. And his company Target Smart. So he's able to get into the voter file and analyze metadata and tell us what's going on with the data. And he's smart and knows how to cut the data in a way that's going to account for things like Trump sending a signaling to Republicans to not vote by mail. And one of the things that we want to know is like, okay, with this early vote, is it just people who'd vote anyway voting early? And we know for sure that that is not the case. We are seeing people in this early vote data who did not vote in 2016, right? Who are voting, and not just a little bit, like pretty substantial pockets of people that are suggestive that we are going to see electorate looks much more like 2008 than 2016. Yeah, and maybe much bigger, maybe, right? You know.
Great. And just a reminder for anyone who's joining us a little bit late, if you would like to ask a question of Rachel and Sam, you should see a link to a Zoom meeting, whether you're on the cycle or on the YouTube channel. Join that meeting and you'll be able to ask your question live. And next, we're going to go to Heidi, who Rachel has a question about the Zoomers. Heidi, I think you're unmuted, so go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, it's so funny. I just looked up Tom on Twitter, and his latest tweet relates to my question. First of all, thank you guys so much for being here, because I've been dying to ask this question. So likely voters often show up in the polls as, you know, a key indicator, but there's a massive turnout this year among the under 30s. So how does that, you know, work into those models? Are those voters captured in these models, and how do they change if there's a big surge of those voters?
Good question. So it depends on the modeler, right? Like, you know, I mean, this is easier to model 2020 than 2018 because, you know, I mean, you should know, right? After what happened in 2018, if you're smart, that you should be expecting a big surge of young voters, of women, of college educated voters, of Latinos, of Asians. Probably the thing that's catching you a little bit unaware is how large the surge of Black voters is, because of the surging groups. It's not that Black voters haven't surged in the Trump era. It's just that their surge has been lower until now, right? Now it's big, right? It's really big. And it's, of course, something always has to come along to screw up my analyses, right? So like my forecast is correct, but also a pandemic came. So maybe, you know, somebody could say, oh, well, it's the pandemic. Kamala Harris gets picked, but maybe it was the summer of racial unrest, whatever it is, something's lit a fire under Black voters because they are on fire in terms of their turnout, right? And but you have to model that and you have to see it coming. 2018 would have been harder for a pollster to anticipate. But when you have a survey, like the hardest part to do is to anticipate what is the electorate going to look like. And the reason why that's important is because the demographic composition of the electorate is going to inform its partisan composition. So if you get the mix of women and young people, Zoomers, minorities, whatever, if you get that wrong, then you're going to underrepresent Democrats and overrepresent Republicans, right? And because that is the main predictor. I mean, it's so powerful, party ID, leaners, independent leaners and party, that, if you don't have that party mix right, your survey is going to be off, right? So like when we look at Virginia's 2017 polling, like where I really got lucky. I mean, I guess it's not really luck. I mean, I knew there was going to be this huge surge, and I anticipated that in my polling, and hats off to my male colleague partner, my senior mentor partner, for trusting and believing in me and saying, you know what, do what you think is going to happen, because I waited in anticipation of a suburban surge that was going to create an electorate that didn't exist before. It didn't exist in 2014. It didn't exist in 2013. It had not manifested in Virginia before. And I weighted our stuff and I created a turnout model based on that electorate, and I was right. And that's what happened, right? But yeah, it's easier once it's already happened. So when will it get hard again? Let's say Biden wins in this cycle, and then turnout is going to go through a reset, right? Potentially, a potentially catastrophic one for Democrats under my theory, where Democrats will be like, oh, sweet, everything's good again. Now the Supreme Court might change that. It might be a permanent negative partisanship generating machine, because all these rights might be getting voided constantly, like upsetting Democrats. But in general, like you'll have to re-anticipate what the electorate's going to look like post-Trump, and you would expect that women and young people and minorities might scale back their participation. So yeah, that's where polling for me, other than instrument design, like the designing of the questionnaire, that's the best part, is trying to hit that right on, because if you don't get it right on, you're going to be off.
Sorry, I was muted. Let's go over to Roger, who's been waiting for a little while. And Roger, I think you should have the option to unmute yourself now, if you can hear us.
Okay.
There he is. Go ahead.
Okay, we have Democratic and Republican indications on registrations in Florida and North Carolina. I'm in North Carolina. Do we know what the composition of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents are for those who haven't voted yet?
Sam, have you had a chance to look at any of that stuff today or the last couple of days? Because I was looking at it the first couple of days of early vote, and then I haven't been back.
For sure. I haven't peeking at it, but definitely don't know the numbers. So it's particularly for our forecast, we kind of have been trying to anticipate what would happen at the end of the election. So not just like throughout the early voting period. So we took into account, everyone that we expect to vote at any point throughout this election process, from early voting and on the final day. So in that way, our predictions are informed by what we think will be the final result after all these people vote. So knowing who has voted so far isn't as helpful, because we just need to know the end of what's going to happen.
Yeah. I was wondering because tonight I saw on one of the shows that apparently the Republicans and Democrats voted in Florida are equal right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is something I track religiously, usually. I've been a little sidelined by this horrible, terrible, no good, terrible kidney infection from hell, right? So it's kind of gotten me, a little sideline from my normal, awesomeness. But no, so yeah, no, there's a great data source to follow for North Carolina. Is it Old Star Politics? Bowtie Politics on Twitter. And he does great early data voting analysis. And, I have never checked out this UMich 99 person from Florida, but I actually have a new source on Florida that I've been meaning to tweet out. And I'm definitely going to get that info tweeted out, if not tonight, probably tomorrow, in terms of that. But yeah, it's really, great stuff to track, and it's so intriguing to look at, and they do a better job of, I just rely on them because they're state experts. There's no way I could ever replicate the institutional knowledge somebody has, like John Ralston in Nevada, what he knows about the state, you know what I mean? So I prefer to just amplify what they're doing and send people to them. But I have just, honestly, I have not had a chance to look at it. I just rely on them because we're state experts. There's no way I could.
So Sam, will the Democrats take Florida?
So good question for Sam.
Great. So yeah, that's definitely our expectation, that Democrats will win in Florida. Biden's expected to win it by 4 points, which gives him about a 76% chance of victory in Florida. And we were able to come to that conclusion based on the demographics of Florida, as well as looking at Trump's approval rating in Florida, which is I believe in the source we use. Oh, sorry. I'm hearing my own echo.
Sorry. I'm remuting a couple folks. We're getting a little bit of feedback.
So yes, Joe Biden is expected to carry Florida in our model, which kind of all of the criteria, both demographics, so demographic realignment and negative partisanship is both pointed towards that.
So, and I'll add to that, like my old model was also super bullish on Florida, like absolutely convinced the Democrats should be winning it. So in 2018, I went all in. I was like, woo, they're going to win it. And then I got burned, So I had been manually handicapping my Florida predictions down. I was like, no, back, right? And like, I still in my heart feel it's a toss up, right? So our rating is likely Democrat. And, I'll believe it when it delivers it, because it's just, I don't know what it is about that state. But I will say this, like the reason in 2018 that Biden lost Gillum lost is because of that senior vote. It's, it just kills you up the, it's the second oldest state overall in the country, but the oldest, like super old state. And, I think that could be the difference maker this cycle. I think losing majority support among seniors could be the difference maker.
Yeah, I've definitely seen 2 points to add on Florida. One that Rachel pointed out earlier is the early voting and the mail-in voting. So we've, studied in the past that a big advantage that Republicans have in Florida is the prolific mail-in voting operation that they have there. And Trump's big attack on mail-in voting in Florida is actually convincing tons of Republicans in Florida to not do mail-in voting, which is very strategic to the Florida GOP strategy to winning in the state, which is why if you do listen to some of his rhetoric, he like changes and says like, oh, in Florida, it's okay to vote by mail, but everywhere else it's not. Because someone must have gotten his ear to kind of like walk that back a bit. And the second is looking at polls both in Florida and elsewhere with Biden ahead in the 65 plus category of voters 65 years and older is a pretty good sign also for Florida that Biden could pull it out.
Yeah, I got to say, if you gave me two options, you could have either majority support of seniors or majority support of Cuban voters in Miami-Dade. I'd go with seniors. You know what I mean? Like if that's what you offered me. So, we'll see.
Okay, Rachel, Lisa has a question about Nebraska's 2nd congressional district and that one potentially tie-breaking electoral vote. Lisa, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Hi, Rachel. I'm telling you what, yeah, you've really gotten my excitement going for this election cycle. This is the first time I've gotten this involved. Thanks to you. You've really inspired me.
Well, thanks. I hope you stay because it's going to be a long fight after this too to, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I just retired in 2017 after he got elected because I was just like, so I retired at 62 because I couldn't handle it. So anyway, my question is, how does this one electoral vote in Nebraska work? The one that I hear about all the time that can make a difference for Biden, if the Electoral College were to be 269 and that one vote in Nebraska could get it to 270 in certain scenarios. How does that work? I don't understand that too well.
Yeah, I mean, Sam, you look excited about this. You want to take it?
Yeah, I'd love to cover it. So almost all the states, give a full set of electoral votes when a candidate wins the state. So New York, Texas, California, all these states will give a whole chunk of electoral votes to the winning candidate in that state. However, two states, Maine and Nebraska, both have a statewide 2 electoral votes that goes out to the winner of the statewide vote, but also within each congressional district in the state has a single electoral vote that goes out to the winner of that congressional district. So Nebraska's 2nd district is actually around Omaha, so the biggest urban area of Nebraska. And it's expected in our model, very likely so, that Joe Biden's going to carry the district. So that one electoral vote from Nebraska will be for Biden. Similarly, Maine's 2nd congressional district is also kind of in the toss-up category that could go one way or the other. And I think it's a little misleading to say that it's likely to swing the election one way or the other. Based on all of the models, that we're seeing, our model as well as the others, Biden is expected to be winning by very large margins in the electoral college vote. So that one vote is really not going to do very much.
Okay, thanks. I was just curious about that, and I didn't know that was possible. So
I will
thanks for
tell you
explaining.
this, what's really exciting about that one spot, and the reason that Trump went there, other than the fact that it's an electoral college, it's also a congressional race that might flip too. So it's kind of like a double dipper, right? So you get two.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Not to mention
Cool.
the Trump campaign left all the supporters stranded.
Was that
I
Middle.
know.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
that's-
so can't be that good for them, but
Yeah, more votes for Biden.
hopefully.
Rachel, we've got a question here in the chat that might be useful for the audience generally. Obviously, some of them are very familiar with your and Sam's work, but others might be newer to your analysis. And folks are asking if you can just give kind of a high-level explanation or overview of what the theory of negative partisanship is and how it works, how it guides your analysis.
Yeah, so the negative partisanship is a term from political science research into polarization. And, polarization, of course, we know well, right? The animosity and the distance between the parties. But it refers to you have your own party identification, and then you have the feelings of hate, but also fear that are grounded in your own partisan identity towards the opposition party. And I've taken that, concept, right? We've taken that concept and applied that to predicting elections, right? Arguing in an environment in which you're the opposition party, you're going to have this natural turnout boost because you are naturally much more angsty, right? Because the other party's in power and they're passing laws that are painful to you, or appointing Supreme Court judges. And that's particularly bad though when it's Donald Trump, because Donald Trump it takes it to the whole next level, right? So it's negative partisanship on steroids for sure. But if it was Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush, there'd still be a negative partisanship effect. But with Donald Trump, it really is much more intense because he is, he's taking democratic norms out, and institutional norms and the rule of law is, of course, the pandemic. Hey, we're just gonna go to herd mentality. I just did the same thing he did. Herd immunity. And that stuff is scary, right? I mean, because unless you're him, you're afraid of dying. So that stuff is is how negative partisanship works. And in terms of being able to predict election outcomes, it dictates. I'm arguing that it dictates an advantage. And so when you think about the turnout that we're seeing, which is incredible, right? I mean, just absolutely incredible turnout. The theory, 16 months ago when I first released the model, and this is before Sam teamed up with me, but the very first version of the model that I released was released on July 1st of 2019. And I was like, hey, what we're going to see in the fall of 2020, 16 months from now, is explosive turnout, and it's going to just be huge. Right? But what we're seeing in Texas, I mean, we've seen the entire electorate of 2016 already show up in early vote. I mean, that's insane, dude. So anyway.
Yeah, I'll add on in terms of what we count for our model. So in our calculations to predict what the outcome would be in each state, 3 factors are used based on negative partisanship. So it's Trump's approval rating in each state. So how many people approve or disapprove, and that is kind of a gauge for how many people are likely to come out and vote for him or against him. Additionally, we have the midterm results from 2018, which shows how many people did go out and vote for Democrats or Republicans. And then third is looking at the incumbency disadvantage, which is essentially we've been able to look, over a bunch of previous terms in recent history. When you are the incumbent president, even one that's not as inflammatory as Trump, you still get some kind of doc for being the incumbent president because you're just going to be associated with all the problems that are going on in the country inherently because you're the one in charge. So Trump's incumbent disadvantage is very large because we can correlate that with how many people showed up during the midterm elections. And that shows a decent, basically correlation. So if we know how many people voted in the midterms, we can see how many voters roughly he's going to lose in the next presidential election. And all of those 3 factors gauge how many people are pissed off at Trump and how many people are going to vote against him or for him.
See how smart he is?
Rachel, we're going to go back to BK if he's still here. He was on a couple minutes ago. He wants to know about Pennsylvania, specifically how close it's going to be. Obviously, both campaigns have spent some time there recently. He says there seems to be a divergence between polls with +7 and those with only +3. So, BK, I'll let you expound on your question if you like. I may have spilled all the beans there, but if you'd like to give a little bit more context on what your concern is about Pennsylvania, go ahead. You should have the option to unmute.
Well, hi. So, according to models, Pennsylvania is the state that's pretty much required for both the candidates to win. It's possible for them to win without it, but the chances of that are very small. So everyone is focusing last minute polling on Pennsylvania, and there has been a divergence in, like right now on 538 because of some partisan polls. I think the average has gone down from like 6 point something to 5 point something.
Yeah.
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 What's going on there?
With an average above 4, right? I mean, so like the margin of error being, I would say 4. You feel pretty good that it's leaning towards Biden, right? But yeah, I think that Pennsylvania is going to be closer, right, than Wisconsin and Michigan. And, but here's the thing, like there's so much suburban and city population in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and those suburbs that it just seems to me like we might actually end up not seeing it as close as we think it's going to be. I think we're going to see explosive turnout out of those areas. like what we saw for Clinton, really, really dwarfed, you know? So, my phone does that all the time. It thinks I'm searching for something with voice search. Anyway, so, but it's just hard to say. And then, in terms of like early voting data, right? We don't have data to look at yet for Pennsylvania, right? Isn't that?
I think about like 30 something percent of the 2016 electorate, or forget the stat, has early voted.
Oh, okay. Well, I haven't looked at the early vote data.
According to what's his name, Michael McDonald's Elect Project.
Okay, I need to go and take a look at it. Yeah, I haven't like really looked at it yet. But it will tell us a lot, right? In terms of like enthusiasm of those areas, right? And
would the recent protests and riots in Philly impact anything or no?
No, I don't think so. I think that the bigger risk is that Biden and his team, really believe that they could cut the margins down in Western PA and spent a lot of resource and time, trying to appeal to those de-aligning, ex-urban and rural Pennsylvania areas that Joe cares a lot about, because that's where he's from, Scranton and such and whatnot. But those are areas that are moving away from the Democratic Party and people that are de-aligning away. I mean, there's ways Democrats could disrupt those de-alignments, but those are long-term messaging and strategic efforts, not something that can be fixed in a campaign message, right? And I have no idea like how much that sacrificed investment, where like investment needed to be made. But like they're convinced that he will overperform Clinton in Western PA, and he may well, right? He may well, but he may not too, because like, we're talking about another 4 years of de-aligning white working class, non-college educated whites moving away. And as the Republican Party decimated unions were the thing. So like the culture war was, waging and what we call like resentment politics, grievance politics, was motivating non-college educated whites away from the Democratic Party. But the anchor to hold those people to the Democrats were unions, right? As unions get decimated, that anchor disappears. They start moving away. So it's really hard to anticipate, I think, what's going to happen. But my sense has always been that it's not going to yield the benefits that they want it to. But we'll see. Sam?
Yeah, so I'd love to chime in too. So our model has Biden up 7 points in Pennsylvania, and that's giving him an 84, let me see. I think it's 84% chance, or I'm sorry, 89% chance of victory in the state overall. And that is based on a number of things. So as we talked about, negative partisanship is a big factor. So in the latest civics poll, Trump's approval rating in Pennsylvania is -12. So by a margin of 12 points, people disapprove of him statewide in Pennsylvania. Similarly, I remember, because I'm a former PA resident, Tom Wolf and the main, Democratic that head up the ticket won by 1 million votes in 2018. Yeah. So the idea that those people aren't coming back out to vote for Democrats again, especially when Trump is on the ballot, because I knew plenty of people, in my community and neighboring communities that are so excited to vote against Trump that didn't even vote in 2018. Wow. I feel very strongly that Pennsylvania, when all the votes are counted, will go towards Biden. But then, as Rachel was saying, that we have to balance that with the realignment effect happening in the Midwest, where you have a ton of white voters that did not go to college, and they're largely aligning away from Democrats and towards Republicans. So when we averaged, those voters moving away with the tons of negative partisanship voters going towards Biden, we were able to get still a +7 margin for Biden there.
Mm-hmm. Also, what's his name? Dave Wasserman has been writing recently about some district level polls that he's been seeing. That
right,
I've heard about this.
That.
Oh yeah, no, I did read that, and it's exactly what I'm talking about in terms of these college educated suburban areas realigning and just on fire for Democrats, right? So like, you know, as Sam was talking about, you know, and I say in the original forecast, if you go and pull it up, and I think we just added it to the website because I noticed it wasn't on there. I say in there, and Sam just made this point. In 2018, the Republicans could not make a contest of the Michigan, I think it was Michigan and Pennsylvania Senate races. They couldn't even make a contest of them. So it's hard to fathom at the end of the day, even though I think they're competitive for sure, that at the end of the day they're going to win these Rust Belt states when they couldn't even put forward to Senate. You couldn't put those Senate races into toss-up category in 2018, you know, and it's because that suburban urban area, Pennsylvania is not just a one city town. So I always saw Wisconsin as the more vulnerable one because it is a one city town, right? I mean, it's got Madison, but other than that, it's got Milwaukee. And the only thing that really helps it is that it's got these exurbs that come up from Chicago in that right southeastern corner. You know, I'm really bad at direction. So southeastern corner, right? So I always thought Wisconsin it's the least urban of them all. So like when I look at states, like when the Trump campaign was like, oh, we're gonna go compete in Minnesota, I was like, oh, that's funny as fuck, because Minnesota is the most college educated of all the Midwestern states, right? So I can't think of a better hole to go dump some money in, you dumb shits, right? Go do it, dude. You know, so like that's how I look at it, you know? And I know that's different than how other analysts look at it. So.
Okay, Rachel, we're going to go to a question from William, who would like to know about your methodology, your categorization methodology for toss-ups. So William, if you are able to unmute, oops, I've just remuted you.
I also have to kick Genzi out of the room. He's being a very bad Australian Shepherd right now.
All right, well, William, it looks like you're unmuted, so go ahead.
He's hunting his ball underneath my wires, and I feel like that's going to end up being very bad. Come on,
Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you. Maybe we'll give Rachel just a sec to get back from taking care of the pooch. Thanks for joining us. I'll take this moment to just remind anyone who's joining us. I see our viewer count's kind of steadily climbing up here. So if you haven't yet, if you'd like to ask Rachel and Sam a question live, click on the link to our Zoom meeting. Whether you're on YouTube or on the cycle.news website, you should see that link. If you join our Zoom meeting, you can ask your question live. And I think Rachel's coming back. Great.
Australian Shepherd disaster right there, you know?
All right, William, go ahead.
I have a question about your House ratings. You note that you have a different definition for what a toss-up is than other forecasters.
Yeah.
And that if Democrats are winning the races that you list in the toss-up column, they're winning by such a large margin that it would be like a long shot that they would win this, right?
Yeah.
So what is the probability that they win one of those seats or any given one of those seats? And how many seats do you predict Democrats will win in the House?
That's a really great question. And you know what? So like, there's always like some weird random sweetheart race. Like in last cycle, like I didn't even have, and I say this in the post, I don't think anyone had Oklahoma 5 or South Carolina 1 on the list, right? So like, that's my attempt this time to avoid having an Oklahoma 5 or South Carolina 1 happen, right? So like that toss-up list. But yeah, so like my definition is this race will probably produce both candidates getting somewhere into the mid 40s, right? Or in a plurality situation where there's multiple candidates, you know, competitive in a plurality situation, but they're not necessarily competitive to actually win, right? And so my estimation at this point, I think, you know, we're really looking at probably somewhere between 10 to 15 races, right? I mean, we're really looking at the possibility of that many races. In Texas alone, you know, we're looking at 4, maybe 5, maybe 6 House seats in Texas for Democrats. I mean, it sounds ludicrous even as I say it. But shit, they just had their entire electorate show up before an early vote, you know? I mean, it's crazy, right? So like people are looking at Texas now at Biden and like, can the state flip? Like that's not, to me, like that's not Texas success. Like, and I'll tweet about this, but to me, like what a night for success in Texas will be is if they flip the state legislature 9 seats and they get, 4 of these House races. That is a huge, huge W in the state of Texas. That may be enough to flip it to Biden, or it may not, but like that is a big, big win in Texas. So it's kind of a shame that people are now looking at the state as competitive to flip for the presidential map, because I feel like when that doesn't happen, they'll be like, oh, Texas fell short, when it may have this amazing metamorphosis down ballot, and I'll be the only person down there going, no, it's a victory. But whatever. I spend my whole life being the only person yelling, so whatever. But yeah, I do like to try to be inclusive in terms of, races that are going to spark competition, because a lot of House races don't generate any competition, right? I mean, we're talking about, and I teach my students this is why we're so fucked up in this country, right? Because we have 2 chambers in the Congress. The Senate is designed not to be representative of people, right? It's designed to represent states, and now it represents cows, right? And so everybody gets 2, whether you're small or big, you get 2 in terms of population. But the House of Representatives is specifically designed to represent people proportionally. And in the House, there's 435 seats. Any given cycle, we're talking tops. I mean, when you stretch the bounds of definitional competition, 60 seats competitive. And when you do the math, guys, that's about 15% of the chamber. That's 15%. So what that means when you flip it around is that 80-ish% of the members of the House of Representatives are electorally incentivized not to compromise, okay? They're electorally incentivized to be radical partisans who don't compromise and don't get shit done, right? And if they did, they would be what we call irrational, because they would end up drawing a primary challenge and getting kicked out of office, right? So it would actually be the worst thing that they could do for their own personal, protection of staying in the seat. And you could argue to serve their own electorate, which is deeply partisan. It's either deeply Republican or Democrat, right? So if your electorate's 70% Republican, your job is to represent Republican interests, not American interest, right? So like when we look at why Congress is clusterfucked, there's a lot of reasons why, but one of them is that the one part of the institution that is designed to like function the best for the people is, through gerrymandering. It used to be about 160 seats that had marginal competition. So to put that into perspective, we're really talking about a massive degradation of competition. And when you have so few people incentivized to compromise, it's no wonder that nothing's happening, right? So anyway.
Okay, Rachel and Sam, we've got Eileen up next. She's having issues with her video, but Eileen, you should be able to unmute. I see you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, I want to say too that you guys have been so motivating for me, Rachel. It's just been, you're like God.
Not at all, dude. I'm just a chick that went to community college and used to eat out of a dumpster now and then.
I hear that. So my question is kind of related to the House. I wanted to find out if you think we'll be able to get more state delegates in the event that Donald Trump is successful in getting some electoral college votes kicked out and nobody gets to 270.
Yeah, I mean, we cannot get to any catastrophic situations that rely on the goodwill of our politicians to act in a noble a noble way, obviously. I used to do this lecture on the electoral college, and then I had these slides that would present, and it would say, ties would go to the House, and then the next slide was a GIF of the scene of the shower scene from Psycho to illustrate how totally fucked that would be, you know? Like,
yeah.
And that was before like Trump, you know, like before where we are this last 18 months in particular, like we're really seeing, you know, like a blowing away of our norms and our safety valves, you know, where we just don't want to be. So, you know, I'm with Sam. I don't think we're going to be anywhere near a tide type scenario. I think we see that coming when it's coming. I mean, the Bush-Kerry election was very tight. The Bush-Gore election was very tight. We didn't have as much data back then, right? We're living in a very data-rich environment now. So it's true we didn't have like Nate Silver's model even, but it was obviously tighter, and so I just don't think we're going to be in that scenario.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Oh, I can't hear Flip for some reason. Can anyone else hear him?
Sorry,
Yeah,
I muted myself.
muted.
The Alexa in the corner was starting to chirp at me, so I muted myself. I see we've got just a few minutes left. We've continued to get more and more people coming in the room. So folks, if you would like to ask a question, jump into the Zoom meeting quick. We might be able to still have a chance to get it in. But while we're waiting for that, maybe you could both just tell us, what do you think are sort of the biggest potential surprises, even if you're not expecting it? What would be a curveball if you were to wake up on Wednesday, November 4th, and be explaining some really weird quirk, a state going the wrong way because they have a strange balloting situation, the litigation effects thereafter might be unexpected, or simply it's harder to handicap the turnout rates, the demographics have been shifting. What if you're told there's going to be one huge curveball state next Tuesday, what's your best guess as to what it'll be? And I'll ask both Rachel and Sam.
I guess, gosh, I don't know. Boy, that's tough.
That's why I saved it for last.
I want to think of something good, you know?
I can start, and then I have like 3 small answers, which vaguely answer your question. So for one, speaking of like waking up on the day after election day, we have the whole discrepancy between vote by mail ballots counted and in-person ballots counted. So especially in a state like Pennsylvania, it's likely that it will take a couple of days to get the final vote tally, and it could likely look like Republicans are doing a lot better than they will after all the mail-in votes are counted, which I hope is explained very well to everyone by the news that there's a lot of outstanding mail-in ballots from Democrats, and that they should not act like the election is stolen when it turns out that Biden ends up winning the state by a healthy margin. Second answer, Texas, with the amount of early voting that we've seen in Texas and just all the polls that we're getting out of Texas, our model has 51% chance of Biden winning. But I think, it's definitely a likely outcome that no one is, truly like willing to accept yet, I guess. And then third would be a lot of these Senate races that we have as likely Republican. One of them is bound to be some kind of unexpected result potentially. So we have Montana, Kansas, Alaska, Texas, and South Carolina, all listed as likely Republican. And it's quite possible, one of these, our calculations could be off, and the Democrat who's not favored to win can likely win one of those seats.
Or really, it's just that the model really can't. I mean, the models are not perfect at all. And the attempt to make one perfect is also foolhardy, right? I mean, models in the sciences is a different thing. Social sciences is a different beast, okay? Hard sciences is Sam's wheelhouse. It's a different thing, right? But in social sciences, models they're not perfect, okay? And this model is not going to be able to account for a scenario like South Carolina, where you have a combination of an incumbent senator who is, developed a relationship with his state where he is seen as betraying basically his whole persona, right? And a charismatic challenger, right? And I mean, there's nothing in the model that we can tell the model, hey, by the way, in South Carolina, there's this fantastic challenger. He's raised triple the money that you would think somebody in that scenario could, or quadruple, So I think South Carolina, of those, it's probably, the one, so you have to think of all of those races: Doug Jones in Alabama, Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, Bullock in Montana, and Jamie Harrison in South Carolina. You have to imagine those will all be won by Trump. Trump will carry that state. So you have to imagine which of those will be voters that go in, and these will predominantly be independents, people that cast ballots for Trump, but will go then and vote for a Democrat. Okay. In 2016, no states did this. No states voted for a Republican, presidential candidate and a Democratic senator, or vice versa. So, I think of all of the scenarios combined with the fact that and now you would think Mitch McConnell, right? But there's not enough Black voter population to pull up the turnout in Kentucky. So I think South Carolina is the place where you might get enough of that, enough independents who are like, God, Lindsey Graham is vile. And you have this huge turnout of Black voters that you might get that perfect storm.
And the third nail in the coffin in South Carolina is they have that conservative third-party candidate who's on the ballot too. So they can go Trump, and then the third-party candidate that will take votes away from Graham.
Right.
And Jamie Harrison could potentially win with a minority of votes.
So like if you were to say like what's the one thing, and that's why I was qualitatively overriding my other model and saying South Carolina's a toss-up. I was the very first person in the country to do it, months ago. I was like, I took one look at that kid. It's probably my age, whatever. Everyone's a kid. I'm a professor. I took one look at that kid. You've got something special about you. I did the same thing to Beto O'Rourke in 2018. Everyone laughed at me. I was like, Texas is gonna be a toss-up, 2018, and sometimes you just know when someone's got it, But and then so I hope that I'm right about Texas. In 2019, I first turned and pointed to Texas, and I was like, this is good. This place is gonna be on fire because it's got demographic realignment, but it's all untapped because Democrats they don't know where they're winning and how yet. They'll eventually figure it out. And they have they have this untapped potential in Texas, in the suburbs of Dallas and Houston and Austin. And they have all of this potential pickup opportunity there. So again, I think Texas is, to me, like, the potential of that state house flipping is a huge, huge storyline to follow.
And one thing that's interesting is that realignment doesn't stop this year. So thinking if Lindsey Graham wins South Carolina this year, in 6 years, which, seems like so far away, he's going to have a much harder opportunity to win re-election again. Texas, Arizona, all places that are realigning strongly to Democrats will be almost largely uncompetitive to Republicans by that time.
Yeah, Republicans, they need, I always give advice that people don't want or don't ask for, but I agree, like they got what they needed out of Trump for sure. And if they were smart, they would cut him loose here and start, repositioning for a bigger tent, because they'll path here. What are you going to do? Shave off 100,000 votes here and there and try to steal the presidency? No, that's not going to work, and then long term, what's it going to be? 200,000? No, you need a big tent. You can't do it with just a shrinking white, non-college educated electorate. You need a big platform, and you can build that quick because the electorate has amnesia. Look at George Bush. People, I love George Bush. People are walking around going, George Bush, I love George Bush, because Donald Trump is made to like George Bush lovable, so it doesn't take long to reset. But man, if two terms of Trump, that becomes a brand for the Republican Party,
Well, Rachel, Sam, I see our hour is up, slightly more than up, but do you have any closing comments for all the fine folks gathered here?
Try not to get too anxious.
Yeah, I would say watch close. There could be some surprising races. I see one comment in the chat about the Kansas Senate race, which is just my favorite. So I'll put in a queue. We have it as likely Republican because Trump is expected to win the state by like 9 points. So we'd need a ton of people to be voting for Trump and then also the Democratic senator, which seems unlikely. However, the data we're seeing, independents are very strongly leaning towards the Democrat in the race. I would love it for it to be the one, exciting news that flips to Dems, but, keep your eye on it for sure.
Talk about candidates that fit their state, right? Talk about Joe Manchin, and he looks like West Virginia, right? John Tester looks like Montana. Barbara Bollier looks like Kansas. And you'd like to think that she can pull it out. And I just think, the model is, there's no model that's perfect. And this model is built to do a good job, but not a perfect job. So, if we get a lot of ticket splitting, which this model is bearish on, then it would get upset. But we have a pandemic going on. I mean, this is an extraordinary circumstance. The last time Kansas elected a Democrat to the Senate was in 1932. Okay. So, the model is definitely bearish on it happening. But the last time that happened in 1932 was also a year in which the economy was in tatters and there was a national crisis. So.
Well, nicely done, Rachel. Nicely done, Sam. Nicely done, audience. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Be sure to follow Rachel and Sam's work at thecycle.news. Rachel is at Rachel Bittekoffer on Twitter. Sam is at, correct me, Sam, if I'm wrong, Sam_Epstein.
Yes, that's right.
Right. Well, thanks, everyone, so much for being with us.
Hosting for us. And also,
thank
everybody
you.
who attended, thanks for taking an hour out of your night to come and hang out with us and learn a little bit more about politics and elections and stuff. And good for you for doing it. And America needs more people like you guys. So.
Yeah, thank you all.